My note says, "This is about my dead dad. Please don't leave." Hello and good morning from Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's 6:30 in the morning. I just watched a lunar eclipse, and now I'm watching a tractor launch a boat. What's not to love? So this is a video about my dad dying. Don't go, come back. So this is a story about making art and about processing grief and loss and how life carries on anyway. Let's start with the story. So I'm an artist. I do a lot of weird things, but mostly I work with wearable art. And I love to participate in a show called World of WearableArt, which happens annually in Wellington, New Zealand. World of WearableArt is a spectacle unlike anything I've ever seen before. It's a shocking theater production that mixes acrobatics and aerialists with the most extraordinary wearable art you've ever seen. Designers from all over the world enter and come together every September to celebrate the show and to meet each other. I started doing the show in 2009. I've been in it 7 times, and this is my 8th year. I love working with different materials, so each year I want to bring something different to the competition. Over the years, I've worked with retired military parachutes, paper mache, bike tubes, 3D printing, and most recently, road cones. I wouldn't be where I am without WOW. I wouldn't be who I am as an artist without WOW. In 2023, I won the inaugural WOW Designer Development Award, which is a grant given to artists to explore new skills that they can bring into their wearable art in the future. I wanted to learn 3D printing and especially wanted to take a class at MIT to build those skills, which I would then apply into a piece that would be shown in 2025. I immediately went home and started taking my class at MIT, which was a 3-day workshop with a bunch of other professionals, learning about different styles of 3D printing and visiting a bunch of industries where they utilize it in different ways. Yeah, I was so excited about the class and really excited about the award. And at the end of the class, my dad called me to tell me that he had just been given 6 months to live. He'd waited to tell me until the class was over so that news didn't ruin my time. I dropped everything and went home immediately to be with him, and got to be with him until the end. We only ended up getting 6 weeks. My dad loved the water. He loved boats. The winds were blowing yesterday, the southerlies. And my dad loved sailing. And I knew in my head that he had told me about the southerlies because that word came to me when the wind started blowing so hard. And I thought, God, Dad, tell me about the southerlies. And he can't. And I wondered, is this just the rest of my life? Just thinking of things to ask him and he's not there. And then I think it's wild that literally every single one of us walks around with this inside of us, missing somebody so terribly. And we just live normal lives and we kind of don't talk about it. It blew my mind when I finally learned that that's what we're all doing. So I guess I'm here to talk about it. In the aftermath, I just kind of had to collect myself. I went back to my studio in Boston and decided to make a piece. That piece ended up being Curves Ahead, which ended up winning Supreme Award at WOW in 2024. I didn't build it to be a Supreme piece. I just built it because I needed somewhere to put my energy. And so after winning Supreme last September, I came back and I had to finish this 3D printed piece. I was already kind of exhausted coming out of the gate. I'd been through this crazy series of events, but I dived in some like manic, unhinged way, dedicated to finishing this piece.
It's really a quick turnaround to start on this piece after this past piece and all the crazy stuff that happened, but WOW has pushed their deadline into mid-February, so I have no time to waste. So we gotta go. I've kind of been like working on this on and off already, so I have like an idea that I'll tell you about, but it's like an immediate return to the crunch.
This piece is a combination of inspiration points. First of all, it has to be 3D printed. Secondly, I realized I really wanted the piece to be about my dad and to feel like a collaboration between him and me. My dad was a photographer. I'm a photographer because of him. So I wanted to use this as an opportunity to put his photographs on the stage. One of the things that my dad photographed over and over again was the surface of the river where I grew up. He would come back to it at different times of day, in different seasons, and he would photograph the ripples and the way that the light played off of it, just like Monet would come back and paint hay bales year after year. So it felt really right to use his water photos as the focus of the piece. I really wanted to let his photograph be the central focus, so I tried to keep the design as simple as possible. I also wanted to keep the design simple because I'm new to 3D printing, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to suddenly render some sort of incredible sculptural Iris van Herpen thing like in 2 months. I really needed to focus on one 3D printing technique and follow it through to its conclusion. I was pulling from a bunch of different visual references. I was thinking about the Bene Gesserit from Dune, grief embodied, about specters and ghosts, Victorian mourning garb, shrouds. I think that's that. We can go somewhere else and talk about my fuck-ups. Let's go. Hard to complain about any New Zealand locations, right? So initially I was inspired by a lot of paper artists and close-up photos of butterfly wings, thinking about how do you abstract an image down into different colored tiles that resolve into one collective image. So that was the initial thought for the design, was transposing my dad's photograph into a 3D printed tiled mosaic. I did a ton of testing on this idea. I modeled a bunch of different tile styles and went through a bunch of iterations and eventually made a prototype of it that I realized was a hot mess.
The original plan, it's not coming together. So I've been like testing out some other things and I think I'm on the right track, but I don't know. I'm like fried and I'm just kind of like stressed. Anyway, whatever. But let's talk about it. So this is as far as I got. And there's like a lot to like about it. I mean, the high sheen on it is really, really nice. But realistically, it just like doesn't resolve into an image at the level that I want it to. I think this is just like an idea that needs like a lot more testing time. So this is like not a I'm never doing it, but this is a like I'm shelving it for now.
And that's part of the creative process, is learning that something you did is not very good. And it's also having the strength to know when it's not very good and to go, okay, back to the drawing board. I realized the initial idea wasn't working and that I needed to regroup very quickly to come up with a better idea.
So I've kind of been going back to the drawing board about what you do when like your idea isn't working. And I knew that like the image was the most important thing. It's like, okay, how can I do that using 3D printing, but like maintain the image? So I was looking at this like bamboo printer that can do up to 16 filaments. And I was like, can I break down this image into like 16 filament colors and then like transpose those into like a color by numbers? But like, I don't have the machine and I don't know the technique. And it's just like a lot of learning, which again, like I'm for, I just don't have the time. In the middle of this, I remembered that there's a 3D printing person on Instagram who I really like called Variable Seams. And she does really, really cool stuff. And she had mentioned using sublimation printing to apply it onto 3D prints. And so she literally was like taking sublimation paper with prints on it and then printing directly onto the sublimation. And she was using like a flexible TPU that you could like peel up. Really cool. And I was like, well, could I like apply that in my own way? So that's what I've been experimenting with. I don't know. I don't even know if this is a wow piece. But like, it's an experiment. I'm technically doing my job.
When I saw this style of heat activated printing being used on 3D printing, I knew we were onto something. So thank you to Variable Seams for that idea. I love the 3D printing community because it's very open and you can kind of pick each other's brains, and people are very, very willing to give you information and give you all of their tips and tricks. So to break it down, sublimation printing uses a heat activated ink that is printed onto a heat transfer paper. That transfer image is then placed onto a synthetic material, which could be a fabric or a plastic. Then it's heat pressed, and the heat activates the ink and transfers it onto the synthetic material, and you peel off the paper and you're left with an image. I find that this process is like unnecessarily complicated to explain if you don't know. And I found that this whole design, like the weakness of it is that nobody knows what this is. Just by happenstance, at the time I was working at a job that had access to a maker space that had a sublimation printer. So suddenly I realized that I could mess around with this technique for no cost and figure out if it would work for me, which it did. I did a ton of initial samples to kind of see if this theory would work. I printed out parts of my dad's photograph, transferred them onto 3D printed objects, and was able to confirm that it does work. I 3D printed little fabric swatches to kind of get an idea of if I could use 3D printed pixels and layering the image on top of them, and if it would still resolve into his photograph. So I'm testing out some small versions of the print I may do for the full-scale design. What I find so interesting is how much they look like eyes. Like, that's for sure an eye. And I'm hoping that once I print these onto fabric and then have them drape, I will be able to visualize it better. Like my water bottle dress forms. It's so cool to see them draped. Let's go, someone's coming, let's go. So the great thing about camping is you can just bring your mug of coffee with you wherever you go. So it's like 8 a.m. now. I've been up since like 5:30 because of the eclipse. Let's take a break and go to town and get a sausage roll and a coffee. Because we're in New Zealand, and that's what you do when you're in New Zealand, yeah? Come on, we'll keep talking. I'm back from town with coffee and a damn good sausage roll. Mission accomplished. There's a cat! There's a cat! So, after I had the sublimation breakthrough, I was able to come up with a really good plan for how to build the garment. Let me tell you that plan because it's more complicated than I wish it was. The most important thing to note here is that the size of the thing you can 3D print is dependent on the size of the bed of your 3D printer. My entire garment had to be built around the size of the bed of my 3D printer. In my case, it's about 11 inches squared. So I knew that I had to break down my garment into components that were no bigger than an 11 by 11 inch square to fit on the bed of my printer. Most of the labor that you see me do is all because I'm limited by my bed size. I knew I wanted the design to be made entirely out of 3D printed fabric. The way you make 3D printed fabric goes like this. You 3D print a series of dots or squares or whatever onto the bed of your printer, and then you pause the print. You then take a piece of mesh fabric and you put it down on top of the print, secure it, and then you 3D print another layer on top of that. The top layer of 3D printing oozes through the mesh fabric and joins with the layer below, linking it and making it one piece of fabric with 3D printing embedded in it. So my garment is made up of 144 3D printed fabric squares that all interlock with each other. For this project, I also chose to work exclusively with recycled PLA filament from a company here in New Zealand called KiwiFil. Since this piece is inspired by nature, it felt really important to me that the materials that I use be recycled and repurposed if at all possible, especially when it's plastic. After I printed 140 plus pieces of 11 by 11 inch fabric, I then had to apply my dad's image on top of it. The way I did that is using sublimation printing. We talked about it, you know. My entire garment is basically one giant circle skirt that starts at the shoulders and goes all the way to the floor. Knowing that, I took my dad's photograph and turned it into a giant circle that then I put a grid on top of and cropped down into a series of 11 by 11 inch images. Those images were then individually saved and labeled in certain orders, printed out on the sublimation printer onto the heat transfer paper. Then I take that sublimated image and I take a piece of 3D printed fabric. I put them together. We put them in a heat press. We squeeze it like a panini for like 20 seconds, and then we release it. What then comes out is a piece of 3D printed fabric that is stuck to a piece of paper. That paper then goes into a vat of water, and over the course of about 5 minutes, it softens up the paper, and then you can peel it off. And then you have a square image on a piece of 3D printed fabric. Congratulations, you have now printed one tile of 144 tiles to resolve one image. Then you take that portion of that photograph and you start to reassemble it like a puzzle into this giant circle. Then you have to meticulously trim around each dot and then tape them together and then flip them over and use a 3D printed pen to draw on the back to glue the different tiles together. Then you have one giant skirt. I wish there was a simpler way to describe that, but there isn't. I could just take the picture and like have it printed onto fabric and bing, bang, boom, we did it. But like, why do it the easy way? From there, I had to take this complicated process that I'd invented and fine tune it. There was so much trial and error, I could talk about it for days. I didn't think there was a problem. Why would there be a problem? I've been using a makerspace at Harvard to print out the sublimation printing, and it worked great. You like print it, you put it in a heat press, it transfers, you dunk it in a vat of water, and the paper peels off, right? The paper peels off, right? Well, it used to, and I printed my most recent batch at the makerspace and wasn't told that there was anything different about it. Took it home and the paper would not come off of the prints. Like it just wouldn't. Like I would put it in the water, I would leave it overnight and it just wouldn't come off. It just would stay stuck. And like literally in the past, it would just shoop right off. So that went down a deep rabbit hole very, very quickly. And of course, I printed this out like the day before the makerspace closed until like January. Nobody's there. I can't go say like, hey, it seems like you changed your paper. I didn't have a problem. Now I do. Like, what's different? And so the like punchline is that it escalated very quickly from like using a makerspace to I bought a printer. All I want to do is get to like a rhythm. You know, like I just want to get to like production. I just want to get to production. We're like getting there, but we're not there. I've like let go of worrying about the deadline because I just can't like move faster than I am. And like this amount of like data collection and troubleshooting is just like, I've never done any of this. This is just the amount of time it takes. It can either be done or it can't be done. I cannot move faster than this. So the hope is that as this 3D printing stuff starts, because it's just going to take a long time, is that while that's happening, I can do like the hand-based stuff. So like the lining and like the top part and like the hat, and that I can be multitasking because like that is just like running continuously. Everything hinges on everything else. So it's like, what can I do in the hour and a half between each of those prints but be sitting right here to like trade things out. Now that I understood how I was going to make it, I had to just get to making it. Before I could start 3D printing, I had to cut out hundreds of squares of tulle fabric. This is the fabric that is sandwiched between the layers of 3D printing and turns it into an actual material. Spoiler alert, bad use of material. I would not recommend tulle when you go up to a really large scale. It's way too fragile. I haven't figured out the ideal material that I want to use for 3D printing fabric, but when I figure it out, I'll let you know. This whole design was a work in progress, and I constantly had to remind myself that it was a prototype. There's a lot I got wrong. There's a lot I wouldn't do again, but I literally didn't know, and I couldn't have known at the time. So I tried to cut myself some slack along the way. So I started by draping the shoulders of the dress. I tried out a few different seam lines to see what would work best for the design, and ended up changing my mind along the way. What's happening? What am I doing? So this was the original draping, and it's fine besides that, like, it's not interesting. What I realized after assembling this, is that structurally, this is going to pose problems because of grain direction. So at center front, it's on grain, and there's 15 pounds of force pulling down from the weight of the garment onto this. So it's really important that this be able to take that load evenly and not like stretch out unevenly. At center front, it's going to be really strong and stable, but as it comes around the side, it gets on the bias. This weight is going to start distorting it. And it may not be a problem in the short term, but in the long term, this is going to grow. I was thinking about like stabilizing this with twill tape or something like that, but I also think the patterning's boring. So we've been messing around with patterning, and I don't know what the answer is yet. But with this strategy eliminates all of that trouble I was talking about grain lines, because by adding in these pattern pieces, each of the center of these pieces is on the straight of grain, right? So what that means is that there's no bias pull here. This creates just like a more stable downward pull that won't distort over time, period. I also think it's very beautiful. I like the line work on this a ton. So a lot of my method with this sort of thing is like, I do an amount and then I just like stare at it while I do something else, because I require processing time, I guess. So we're in like rumination phase here. And at this point, I need to see the body to answer what this needs to be. For the lining, I found like 120-inch wide black satin. I wanted the lining to have as few seams as possible, so I wanted to find something as wide as possible. Again, it's just a giant circle, so I ended up being able to split the circle into 2 panels. I had to lay out all of the material and fold it up and do the circle skirt thing and measure it out all the way around the perimeter to get the right hem length and the right shoulder length. And then I cut it all out, sewed it up, and added horsehair to the hem to help kick the hem out. So headwear is a really important part of any design for me. I think most garments aren't as good without a hat. Maybe I'm biased, actually. So I am named after my great grandmother, who was a milliner. So maybe it's in my blood, but I'm a hat girl. Part of what I love about hats is that they create extra height and extension in a piece, and they create more presence. So since I was thinking about veils and shrouds and dementors and mourning garb for this, I knew I wanted a headpiece that was kind of a veil, but that no matter what, like obscured the face. And I also knew I wanted to add as much dramatic height as possible to the design. I've been kind of like thinking about headpieces. I made this sample not to be like a tiny hat, but just as like a material test. And then it perfectly fit. And I actually I like it. And I think the proportions are pretty tight. I'm thinking about like water. I'm thinking about flowing. I'm thinking about like natural elements, but I'm messing around. I was like, what if counter to this all being 3D printed, if this was like traditional millinery? So I work at the ART occasionally in the costume crafts shop. And the lead of that shop is wonderful and amazing. And he has a lot of traditional millinery skills. So I went and like picked his brain one day, and he really helped me out. The form of the hat is super simple. It's literally just a rectangle of cinema folded on the diagonal and then kind of pulled on the bias, and all of that excess material is pushed up to make all the ripples. I used millinery wire for the structure for the entire hat. The millinery wire is hand sewn in around the entire perimeter of the form. And then I kind of bent it into different shapes until I got it to have that upward flow that I was looking for. He also taught me how to stiffen hats. He gave me a bunch of powdered gelatin, and all you have to do is boil some water and add the gelatin to it, and it mixes up into this goo that you can put in a spray bottle and then spray the cinema, and it will strengthen it. I basically just hung the hat upside down and would spray it, and as it would get wet, it would kind of elongate, and I'd pull it longer and longer, and then you let it dry. And I just layer and layer and layer the gelatin up until it got as stiff as I wanted. The one thing I've learned about hats over the years is that it's all about architecture. The way that you design them will determine how weight and load is carried on the head, and really can make the difference between something that's wearable and not. One of the things that I've learned is that with any hat shape, you want like a forward to backward stability, but you also want a side to side stability. A 4-directional support structure for a hat is always a good idea. I knew that the hat would need a wire frame to support the veil, but I wanted it to be like a visually stunning part of the design, not just to be functional. To design the shape of the frame, I got a styrofoam head, and then I took 1/8" architectural drafting tape, which is really an incredible material. You can stick it down on things, you can bend it and twist it around, and so you can get really beautiful draped lines, but you can also peel it up and redirect it. I love using this when I'm draping, and it's just a really excellent material to try out lines without drawing them permanently. I drew out the form with the tape on the head form, and then I took millinery wire and I bent it to follow the shapes that I had drawn out on the foam head with the tape. From there, I attached all of the wire pieces together using a very heavy-duty thread. And then a classic millinery technique is you take long, thin strips of tulle and you wrap it around the millinery wire, and that creates a base that then you can sew on top of. After the entire form was wrapped in tulle, then I beaded the whole thing to kingdom come. I didn't take any video of that process, so enjoy my cat. For me, the black beading was thinking about the way that light glistens off of wet rocks. And so I really wanted to kind of bring in that chunky texture up into the headpiece that otherwise is like a very, very simple object. Hello, hello. Ooh, where's the light? Oof, it's bright in here. So it's January 4th. I have like 5 weeks until the deadline, which I'm actively trying to not think about right now. We are deep in 3D printing process. You can't see it, but I can hear it. The 3D printer is running like 12 hours a day right now. And we just kind of keep going. I'm in the middle of printing 160 11 by 11 inch fabric 3D printed tiles. So that takes a lot of time. Each tile takes an hour and a half to print, plus me changing them out. So I think I've like done the math, and it's gonna take like 21 days just to like print the volume of fabric that I need. So I'm trying to like do other things while I do that. Behind me is kind of the first time I've seen this garment at full scale, which is like very intense. I have like mixed feelings about it. I think anytime you start to see something come to life at full scale, it can take you aback or confuse you or kind of change your perspective. So rather than like freaking out or thinking too much about what I do or don't like, I'm kind of letting it exist in the space, and then I can kind of respond to it. The main thing I'm encountering right now is that it feels very clerical. It is about mourning. It is about kind of sadness and grief, but like not in a religious way. I think the white neck band is really what's doing it an injustice, and that will be changed. It's going to be black. I have like this sample right here of the actual fabric printed, and it looks really good. So this is really a trust the process. At this point, there's no going back. We've committed, and so now I just have to do it and hope it looks good. This is the first piece I think I've ever made where like I literally don't know how it's going to turn out. When we're making wow pieces, obviously we never quite know what the end result will be. You have the idea that's in your head, but you don't know if that's what will happen. With this piece, because I've never done this technique before, I'm so far out of my element, it's impossible for me to know if this will look good or even look like anything. It could just be a hot mess, and I have to live with that. I really feel the weight of the Supreme Award on me. Literally like minutes after I won, people were like, what's next? And that's like a really heavy question to be asked generally, let alone like moments after like the biggest success of your life. And so I'm kind of fighting with that, like the expectations that I assume are there from other people and the expectations that are there from myself. And so I have all of these things swirling in my head. And my friend Lindsay was like, hey, Remember that this piece is about your dad. Don't make it more complicated than it has to be, you know? It's about him. He had like a beautiful, natural simplicity to him. Let that shine through in the piece. And that really meant a lot. So I'm trying to like ground in that. This is for Monty, it's for me, it's for us. So that's what I'm trying to come back to when I get kind of lost along the way or worry about other people's expectations. It's about us. Throughout this entire build, my studio is a prime example of everything, everywhere, all at once. I am constantly bouncing between maintaining the 3D printer, changing out the 3D printed fabric for a new sheet, then going over to the sublimation printer, troubleshooting issues with it, printing out every single sublimated tile to be applied onto the 3D printed fabric. Then I'm taking the sublimation, attaching it to the 3D printed fabric, putting it through the heat press, taking it to the bathroom to soak in a tub of water before being hung out to dry, then assembling all of those panels together. It is chaos. There's a method to my madness. I know what's happening and I have a tight lead on everything, but it is not a calm, orderly step-by-step. It is all happening simultaneously. Through this whole process, I really had to cut myself a lot of slack because I have never done it before. And so things don't always go right the first time, do they? Or the second, or the third. But it felt like a lot of stop and start. It never quite felt easy. But then I remembered that every WoW piece I build is the first time I'm building something, which maybe seems inane. But like, think about your favorite garment pattern that you have, right? I bet you have one, and I bet you're really good at it, and I bet you're really fast at it, and I bet you've done it enough times that you have practiced it. But WoW pieces aren't like that. Everything is the first time, and so everything is learning from the ground up. So you really have to cut yourself a lot of slack and remember that. Once everything was finally put together, this was the first time I saw the garment in totality. This whole time I have just been building it on like a wing and a prayer and like a guess about how it will look. And so getting it assembled was really a really huge step to be able to finally see this thing that's been in my head. The first time I put it on the form was the first time that I was able to really see it move. And you can see on my face, I just didn't buy it. Seeing it on a form for the first time did not bring me the reassurance that I was like hoping for. We persevere. We come up with an idea and we execute, and then something happens or doesn't. What I know now about this piece is that it's a piece that you like have to see performed. It doesn't read in pictures. It doesn't read on a dress form. Like, it only works on a body in person. I don't know what to make of having made something like that. I mean, it is what it is. I always knew that I wanted the garment to glitter and shine under lights. And so I thought about a bunch of different ways to achieve that effect with a top surface coat. And eventually I just settled on gloss spray paint. But you may not know this. It's very cold in Boston in January. It's like in the 20s, which is like -3 to 5 Celsius. So not spray paint weather, which led me to doing the very little sister thing of calling my sister in Texas and going, hey, can I come crash at your place and turn your backyard into a spray booth? And luckily she said yes. So I hopped on a last minute flight to Texas, went to the Home Depot immediately, bought all of their gloss spray paint, and then got to work in her backyard. It was super windy the whole time that we were there, so we had to take every heavy object from her kitchen and use it to hold down the tarp. The weather was perfect. It was in the 80s the whole time, which allowed me to spray paint the whole garment and then let it cure in the baking sun for a really long time. So then back to the winter wonderland from whence I came instantly to put the whole dang dress together for the final time. It was in a really tight time crunch at that point. It was only a matter of days until the application was due for WOW this year. The finishing details included attaching the whole 3D printed component to the neck piece that I had draped. And then like there's a whole section of stuff I just didn't film. I didn't film the entire neck section, but in summary, I created a sheer overlayer to kind of visually connect the 3D printed bottom to the top. And so I 3D printed some dots across the top like rain droplets. And then I sublimated an extension print from the body of the garment upwards. And then I covered that in UV resin. And then I beaded the whole neck of this, which kind of extends the beading from the headpiece down into the neck. So yeah, I did all of that off camera. This door loves to blow. Well, that's the Southerlies. They're blowing this door. Monty. After the gown was mostly wrapped up, we jumped in the car and drove over to the Catskills where we were doing the photo shoot with my friends. I ended up having to bead the entire collar in the car and then stay up all night once I was at my friend's house finishing it there. I was that down to the wire on getting this done. The photo shoot itself was amazing. I found this incredible loft location that was perfect for showing off the piece and allowing it to be nice and big and fill the space. My friend Melanie modeled it for me, and she's been my model since I started doing wearable art in like 2009. And my friend Amanda came over and did behind the scenes video while I was taking the pictures, and Julian was there to help out. The shoot just brought a lot of really good energy that I needed with a piece that I was feeling really insecure about. After the shoot was done, I sent off photos to WOW, and it made it through the first jury, and they said, looks good, pack it up, send it to New Zealand, and we'll make sure we want it. The wind's a change a-blowin'. I wasn't feeling really good at the end of this process. I was really down on myself, really kind of hung up on my failures, and really hung up on all the things that I knew I could change if I had the time, and I just didn't have the time. It made it through second jury. And I'm really nervous about it. I'm really nervous about this piece. It's very revealing and exposing, both because of like the personal nature of the inspiration. I'm not usually this personal in my inspiration publicly, but also because it's a follow-up to a Supreme win. It's a sophomore album, you know? And it's a sophomore album. Like, it's not my best piece. That's okay. We don't always make our best thing, right? It's not hit after hit unless you're Taylor Swift. So there's a lot of having to come to terms with all of it. The technical failures, the knowledge gaps, the learning curves. You just have to accept it all and go, okay, I did the best I could. I made it this far. I learned this much. And now I can take the skills and go try better. Looks like it's almost time. Let's go walk down to see the sunset, and then you can see the final result. All right, let's put on some shoes. Let's hit the road.